I will start by asking everybody to please put your phone in a meditation mode and a mindfulness mode. So thank you so much for joining us tonight for Vicarious Trauma, the Ethics of Self-Care event. We're very grateful to the Jung Center for hosting this event. They're here tonight. Tonight we'll have two great speakers. We'll have Sean Fitzpatrick, who is the Executive Director of the Jung Center. Sean holds a master's degree in religious studies and clinical psychology, also a doctorate degree in psychology. He is actually a psychotherapist in private practice and has done a lot of research in the areas of intersection of psychology and spirituality, ethics and the imagination, vicarious trauma, and the self-care needs of helping professionals and social service providers. Dr. Chaul, Alejandro Chaul, some of you have met before, and who has attended any of the previous events that were held in the past?
Hey, good.
So you're familiar, some of you are familiar with Dr. Chaul. For those who are meeting him for the first time, Alejandro is the founding director of the Mind, Body, Spirit Institute. He's studied Tibetan tradition since '89. He holds a PhD in Tibetan religion from Rice University. He has been teaching meditation classes, workshops nationally and internationally. Since 1999, Alejandro has been teaching these techniques at the Integrative Medicine program at MD Anderson, where he holds a faculty position. He's also associate faculty member at the University of Texas McGovern Center for Humanities and Ethics. So thank you so much for taking your time and teaching the program tonight. And for those who are logged in remotely, we have a lot of people logging in nationally to see the event. Thank you for taking the time as well. I'm going to do a little promotion. Alejandro just published a book, Tibetan Yoga for Healing, for Health and Well-Being. It's available here at the bookstore, and it's also available on Amazon. It's a great book. Thank you so much, and I'm going to pass the microphone.
Okay. Thank you.
Turn it off.
Thanks, Mila. I got it. Thank you. Thank you, darling. I got it.
Sean, one of the cables.
I think I'm okay.
Okay.
It's my power. If it
Your
dies,
power or?
Sometimes it's tough to determine where I end and the computer begins. Can everybody hear me? I don't know if I'm being amplified. Sounds like I'm being. Got me? Okay, good. Thanks, Fred. I really want to thank Mila. Mila, where are you? There you are. Thank you so much for bringing this event here. This is a long legacy, this event, of caring for people who don't often get cared for. And that is a community of professional interpreters. And this has been a wonderful process of getting to know the interpreters community, and working with MasterWord has been such a joy. How many of you are professional interpreters? Many of you are. How many of you would describe yourself as one of a variety of social service providers? Yeah, just about everybody else. Okay. And how many of you are here at the Jung Center for the first time? Fantastic. I'm going to give you my 90 seconds of what could be an interminable speech about the Jung Center. This place has been in existence since 1958. All in this neighborhood. Carl Jung, if you're not familiar with Carl Jung, he's the Swiss psychiatrist for whom this institute was named. And we have, for the last 60 years, this is our 60th anniversary, cultivated psychological insight, self-awareness, and creative expression through educating the general public. About 20% of the people who take classes here are professionals who are here to get continuing education credit for their licenses. Everybody else is here because they want to be here, and because what we offer here are valuable tools for self-care and for living an examined life, for examining your life. So if this is your first encounter with us, I hope you come back. And I'm going to defer to my great friend Alejandro Chaul to tell you a little bit about the Mind, Body, Spirit Institute, which I'm really very proud of. This is the future of the Jung Center that we're launching here in our 60th year, and this program is a part of the Institute's good work. I want to start tonight with a story. So I was trying this morning to figure out what year it was precisely. I think it would have been 2006, so 12 years ago. I was a baby psychotherapist, and I was in training, and I was still a student. And for people who are getting a mental health license, what you do is you have what they call practicum experience, where you go out to a site and you start to practice therapy under the supervision of licensed professionals. And so I went to the University of Houston, in the main campus, and I worked in the Counseling and Psychological Services office. If you're a baby therapist, they give you clients that have that don't have significant problems they imagine. A little bit of test anxiety, some loneliness or homesickness are typically who we work with, and they take great care to make sure that we're not in over our heads. Well, when I was in my program, I found myself unexpectedly in over my head. I had a client who made it through the intake process and to me, and she was very significantly depressed. She was suicidal. And we had a really good working relationship. I cared about her very much. We saw each other once a week. We saw each other on Friday afternoons. She was my last client of the week. I'd been working with her for about 6 weeks, and she was in a particularly dark place. And on that Friday afternoon, as I did every Friday afternoon, I went by Kroger. I like to cook. I like to eat, and I'd spend much of the day fantasizing about what I was going to cook. My wife worked late, and so the pattern was I would go to Kroger, I'd pick up food, I'd come home, and I would cook dinner, and then she would come home at some point, and we'd eat together. So, as many of us do, I expect, on a Friday night, I typically would have a beer while I was cooking. And for some reason that night I went home and I decided I didn't want a beer, I wanted a Jack and Coke. And when I say a Jack and Coke, I mean a Jack and Coke, okay? Yetis weren't around back then, but it was this size. It was about this big. And I cooked. Dinner was done. My wife wasn't home yet. I settled in to watch television and eat dinner, and I poured myself another. By the time she got home, I was puking drunk. Happy to say that hasn't happened since. And my wife is a social worker, and she was very kind and caring and sympathetic. And I knew fairly quickly what had happened, which is that this was my first experience of really sitting with the suffering of someone else, really having to be present to it and empathic, and to welcome it into myself. And it was too much. And I hadn't learned yet how to be ready for it, how to navigate what was going to happen to me in this work. And it's when I began to become interested in this subject of self-care. So tonight, very briefly, what's going to happen here is I'm going to yap. And I'll ask you to collect your questions. If there's a term or an idea that just doesn't make sense, if you want me to just clarify with a quick definition, or I can do that. What we want to do is hold most of our questions till the end for us to have a dialogue. But I'm going to talk for about a half an hour, and then I'm going to turn it over to Alejandro to take care of the next part of the evening, where you get really practical steps for dealing with vicarious trauma and some of the normal stress that we have in our work. So, 5 objectives. We're going to define vicarious trauma and secondary traumatic stress. We're going to describe the impact of vicarious trauma on interpreters and mental health professionals. We're going to discuss what I call the ethics of self-care. We're going to explore 5 dimensions of self-care, and we're going to practice mindfulness. So just to begin, a few definitions. Stress is a natural reaction to events that happen in our life, right? We all feel stress. It's unavoidable to feel stress. Distress is what these authors, psychologists define as emotional reactions in response to ongoing challenges, stressors, or demands in one's life. Stress and distress are on a continuum, right? When we are starting to experience distress, our life is becoming disrupted. And we need to be curious about why that is. How many of you have heard of these terms before you came in here tonight? Vicarious trauma? Okay. So in the clinical literature, first of all, that is great to hear that as many of you have heard about it as have. In the clinical literature, if you get down in the weeds, these terms vicarious trauma and secondary trauma have kind of adjacent meanings. We use them relatively interchangeably. I could get into technical reasons why they're slightly different, but for our purposes tonight, we're going to use them interchangeably. The idea is very simple. It's that you experience symptoms of trauma yourself after you've been exposed to the trauma of others. Right? And this is a real phenomenon. People who are doing, and one doesn't have to be in our professions to feel this way. Any of us can experience vicarious trauma. We've had a traumatic year in Houston, collectively. Every one of us in the room knows somebody who felt that their life was at risk during Hurricane Harvey. If it wasn't one of us, it was somebody that we know. And my son is 10 years old. My son is sitting across the hall, hopefully behaving himself right now. Hi, Danny, if you're watching. You know, the shootings in Santa Fe have led to a lot of difficult conversations for parents of children, not just for parents of children. We can all be exposed to this in our personal lives. As professionals, we are at significant risk of being exposed to the trauma of others, and you work with people's trauma all the time. People who are exposed to trauma secondarily or vicariously are at just as much of a risk of developing psychiatric conditions that we would call acute stress disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder. Okay, you can develop these simply by being in contact with the trauma of others. It doesn't mean that everyone will, but it's a real possibility. 100% of people who are exposed to a trauma, people who experience a trauma, are going to experience stress as a result. Okay. 60 to 70% of those people, and this includes all of us who do this work, are going to get better or return to normal with minimal intervention or with no intervention at all. MasterWord sent out this afternoon an email that gave some last pointers for coming here this evening, and also included a short survey for people to fill out. I'm not going to ask if you filled it out. I just want to comment on the results. We actually, given that it went out this afternoon, we got a lot of results. I saw 25 last I checked. And I want to tell you something the statistics bear out, and also it still never fails to surprise me to see, which is that the scale that I drew that from is called the ProQol, P-R-O-Q-O-L. If you're interested, there's a stack of them sitting on the front desk. As you leave, you can pick one up, and you can score yourself. It tells you how to score it yourself, so you can get a sense of where you are. The 10 items that I used were drawn from that. And about half of them had to do with experiences we're about to talk about, which is what does trauma look like? What do symptoms of trauma look like? And the other half had to do with strengths. They had to do how much you experience yourself caring about your job, whether you feel that the job is meaningful and satisfying to you, whether you feel that you actually are helping those that you're serving. And as I looked at the results, it showed on that side that by and large, not entirely, but by and large, the people who filled it out felt that they were fulfilled in their work, that they were helping the people that they were serving, and that the work was meaningful to them. On the other side, and I'm going to talk about these symptoms in just a moment, but when we talk about being concerned about symptoms of trauma, a not insignificant number of people who filled it out, I would say close to half, would say that sometimes or often or very often they experience these symptoms as a result of the work they were doing. Right? And I wanted to share that with you just to say that if you are experiencing some of these symptoms, you are not alone. It's part of the work, right? And the people around you are experiencing similar things. So let me talk about what I'm talking about. Okay. So as a psychotherapist, as a psychologist, we talk about trauma as having sort of being arranged in clusters, 3 clusters of symptoms. So the first is intrusive thoughts or images. When I'm sitting with a client, well, actually, I'll just tell you a story. Last week, I was sitting with a friend and colleague, and it happens he worked for the police department, city police, and he told me a story about a child, which I'm not going to share with you. He told me a story about a call that he made about 4 years ago, where a child had been grievously abused. And his reaction to it was to stay on after his shift was over, to take the family to the hospital, to stay with them through the process that they had to go through to document the abuse. And it had never left him. He told me that story, and the image that he gave me, the story that he told me, I created an image of that in my head, right? That image hasn't left me, and it does intrude on me. I don't want, without wanting it to. I over the course of the last week have had that image appear to me. I didn't see it firsthand. I wasn't there. It's my own imagination that has created this. Okay, so intrusive thoughts, intrusive images are indicators for traumatic stress. Okay. Now, I don't think that I'm not diagnosable, right? I don't believe I've got in the middle of having an acute stress disorder. But I'm noticing it. I'm noticing that I'm having a difficult time letting go of that story. So the second cluster of symptoms have to do with avoidance. So we were on the radio last week talking about this, and the host mentioned that if he found himself, after hearing a friend talk about a really horrific car crash on a particular section of the freeway in Houston, that he found himself taking a different route so that he wouldn't have to go by that. It wasn't even a crash that he witnessed. This is avoidance, okay? And it doesn't just mean avoiding the physical places, though. Graciela, where's Graciela? Is Graciela here? Did not hear. Okay, she didn't make it. Okay, or maybe she's out there. Graciela told a story about her own avoidance in the hospital in which she works, and that she had an experience of vicarious trauma working with a client, just had a very intense experience working with a client, and then found herself avoiding that part of the hospital, just not being able to walk by it. Avoidance can also take the form of substances. By the way, this is water tonight. Right? There are lots of ways that we avoid our experience. Also, avoiding talking about it. Avoiding relating to other people because we're so activated by the experience. The last example here is the last cluster of symptoms is called hyperarousal. I do work with the Harris County forensic investigators, and one of the forensic investigators told me when we were talking on this subject, on self-care and secondary trauma, and one of the investigators told me that he has kids. He told me really somewhat with a certain amount of self-confidence. He said, this is how I deal with it. I just flip a switch. When I go home, I'm with my kids and my family, and I don't talk about or think about the things that are going on during the workday, and it's okay. But another time he told me that he can't walk down the street with his kids, his own neighborhood, because when he does, all he can see are the cars that are about to run his children over. All he can see are the manhole covers that he's seen people slip on and fall and die, crack their head open and die. All he can see are the hazards. And so he's unable to just take a walk through the neighborhood. Catch him on another day, he'll tell you he can turn it on and turn it off and it's not a problem. I think the story is actually true. So that's hyperarousal. It's feeling like you have to be vigilant all the time, that there's some risk that's going to come and get you out in the world because you've been exposed to a lot of what the average person doesn't get to know about. So we break these clusters down. It can look like this. Just being tired, having your body start to break down on you. As I was talking about earlier, withdrawing from social activities, this is a kind of avoidance. Reduced productivity, feelings of hopelessness and despair, we might think of as depression. Having nightmares, and this is where there's intrusive thoughts and memories. If you're starting to imagine the experience of someone else, you can also have nightmares about the experience of someone else. Feelings of re-experiencing the event. And as we've said, having unwanted thoughts or images pop up. And also what we would call anxiety, just general anxiety. And anxiety is a feeling in your body that we tend to associate with certain somatic states. For me, I sweat, I cramp, my pulse races, my blood pressure goes up. Right? Talked about excess vigilance, hypervigilance, avoidance of people, and persistent anger or sadness. If you find yourself unable to not be sad, or you find yourself snapping at your family members and you can't let go of it, these are all warning signs. These are things we want to be paying attention to. So now, let's talk just about the interpreters community. There hasn't been, first of all, there just has not been an overwhelming amount of research on secondary trauma, no matter what profession you're in. As a bit of history, you might find it interesting to know that the veterinary profession is where sort of the leading edge of conversations about vicarious trauma is. Because vets, if you think about it, not only do they form relationships with the people who bring the pets in, they form relationships with the animals. And so vets learned very quickly that they were at incredible risk. And in fact, vets notoriously have one of the highest suicide rates of any profession, and so on. Since then, social workers, particularly people who are working with children, child protective services and juvenile justice workers and so on, have begun to take this more seriously. There just is not enough research. But I'm going to give you some high points from some small studies that I think are really revealing for the interpreters community. In one study, 56% reported being emotionally impacted by their work, more than half. Much more than half found it difficult to stop thinking about their clients' troubles, 67%. 33% related that interpreting had an impact on their personal lives. 28% reported difficulties in taking other assignments and felt weary, distracted, and in emotional turmoil. This is from 2010. Another study, this is from the AIIC, 54% felt that their family life suffered to a moderate or a high degree from their work. And this is yet another study. 1/3 of interpreters reported symptoms associated with vicarious trauma after working with victims of violence. And the more sessions you do, the more the symptoms increase. So it's just a snapshot. Let's change channels here and start talking about ethics. I was talking to somebody about this today. I had Texas Children's Hospital social workers asked me a few years ago to cook up a presentation on the ethics of self-care. I'd never thought of it before in that context. And I'll be honest, I think they have a self-care group, and they needed an hour of ethics. And they just wanted to mash the two of them together so they could get it all done at once. And but it was a really important exercise for me to think about. I was telling somebody about this today, and what I said is that, in a sense, it's people who are drawn to professions in which they're serving other people tend to put themselves last. And I'll tell you actually a story I gave a version of this presentation to leadership the leaders of a prominent charter school system in the city of Houston. They were the principals to be, the principals to come, and they had regular trainings. And a friend of mine who was in charge of this program invited me to present at that. His boss, who was very high up in the system, sat in on the workshop as well. I did my spiel and talked with them at some length. And afterwards, I got the feedback from my friend that the principals in the room thought it was really important. His boss said that she thought that her work was too important. Her work with the kids was too important for her to focus at all on herself. She didn't have time for self-care. Which is just, it's the risk that we run, that we will lose sight of the absolute fact that if you are not healthy, you're not going to be able to be present for your clients. If you are struggling, and this is, by the way, this is from the Code of Ethics for Social Workers in the state of Texas. It says a social worker shall refrain from providing services while impaired by physical health, mental health, medical condition, or by medication, drugs, or alcohol. So the social workers are very direct about this. If you're not taking care of yourself, you are the instrument of healing. You are the instrument of change in people's lives. You know this, the interpreters in the room, you are speaking for them in their voice, in your own voice, but using their words and their emotion, they're channeling it. You are the instrument of change in these people's lives. And if you are not sharp, if you're not well rested, if you're not able to be present, you're not going to do good work. These are, I'm sure you know, for the interpreters in the room, the dimensions of interpreters' ethics. I don't necessarily need to review them with you, other than to say this. I read the code. I found it interesting. Of course, there's not a place in here like there is for the social workers where it says you have to be professionally competent, but that's implied in all of this. Right? In order to be able to do any of these things, you have to be sound of mind and body and spirit. So let me take a different perspective and talk about ethics from a Jungian psychological standpoint for a brief minute. So ethics describes a relationship between myself and another person. This is the most basic idea around ethics is that we have some obligation to treat the other in certain ways that is respectful of their otherness, right? And is not going to harm them, right? One of the very first bedrock ethical notions in the Western imagination is Hippocrates and the idea that first you do no harm. Okay, first we do no harm to others. So we imagine, I'm going to skip back and forth here for a minute. So this is how we imagine the relationship to be. There's self and other, and there's a separation between us. Psychology tells us that there's more to us than we're aware of. That there's what is conscious and then there's what is unconscious, right? There's aspects of who we are that we don't have control over, we aren't aware of in any given moment, but are still there. If you're in a room with somebody else and you have had a history of trauma yourself, they're not going to be aware of it. You're not going to talk about it. You're probably not going to be paying attention to it at all, but it's still there, right? It's still present. And so these two areas for both of you overlap. Both you and the person you're working with overlap. And they can overlap to such an extent that they can start to intrude on your conscious ability to practice, and the other can experience you. So what the other is experiencing can really intrude on who you are as a human being, and vice versa. And this can have, so let me, I'm going to come back to these images here in just a moment. To two very simple principles. I will always affect those that I encounter, just by who I am in the room. No matter how much I imagine I'm hiding it or making it look like I'm okay, keeping a professional face, what's really going on for me is always going to affect the others that I'm working with. And those that I'm encountering are always going to affect me, even if I tell myself that it's not bothering me at all and I'm fine, right? So we go from this to this, right? we're all constantly interacting with each other. And what is not immediately accessible to our conscious life is always also present, and it can propagate across a community. You think about the effects of, I think of 9/11 first of all, but the way in which trauma, the effects of trauma can spread across a community very quickly. A couple more points on ethics, and I'm going to step into the good stuff, and then the better stuff I'm going to hand to Alejandro. So when we think about ethics, I want to talk about ethics in a broader sense and say that we have an ethical urge. And the ethical urge is to respect and safeguard the experience of the other person I'm working with. And it reflects something fundamental about the human psyche. We have this fantasy that as I'm talking to you, I have this fantasy that I am one person, right? Neuroscience, as well as 100 years of psychotherapy research, suggests that that's not the case at all. That I am multiple. The neuroscientist David Eagleman talks about how the brain is organized neurologically as a team of rivals. That there are many parts that are constantly negotiating with each other within me. So I am relational internally as well as being relational outside in the world. So when we're talking about ethical codes sit right here. These are these regulatory expressions of ethical concern. These are the things you should do and you shouldn't do in order to be a professional. But our obligation to the other is much broader than that, right? It sits in a much bigger field. Okay. So now let's talk about self-care. Self-care is a really simple idea. The most important word here is the second one. Any intentional actions you take to care for your physical, mental, and emotional health. And somebody's taking a picture. I'll let you take the picture of it. By the way, we'll have these slides on. We'll send these slides around. If anybody wants access to these slides, we'll have a PDF that you can access. I often say to clients, but elsewhere in my life, that 90% of the work is just being aware. Because there's so much of what's going on in my experience on a daily basis that I'm not paying attention to. So I'm going to give you 3 easy questions that you can have with you to ask to sort of reflect on your experience in any given moment. The first one is a question you should answer. You should ask yourself regularly and check in with, which is, what is my normal? Everybody has different normals, right? In terms of what is healthy or habitual for us, and everybody operates differently. There's no one self-care plan that we want to prescribe for everyone. But this is the first question: what is my normal? The second question is important too, which is, okay, so is my normal healthy? Is there changes that I should already be making? Are there changes I should already be making in my lifestyle? Which is an important question to ask. But the third question, and most important as an ongoing practice to be an ethical practitioner, is how am I varying from my own normal? How are things starting to shift? Am I starting to get in more fights with my spouse? Am I starting to sleep in later? Am I starting to wake up in the middle of the night? Have my eating habits changed? So now I'm going to shift to, we could have 10 or 20 or 3, but tonight I'm just going to talk about 5 dimensions of self-care. And they're really simple. My son pointed out to me when I was putting this PowerPoint presentation together, he said, "Dad, that bear isn't asleep." I said, "Yeah, but he's headed that way. He's going to be sleeping soon." The first is sleep. Right, so I imagine everybody in the room has heard that we need 7 to 10 hours of sleep to function optimally. I will say one thing, which is that our bodies historically, when people are put on, there's sleep studies that have been done where they take a bunch of college students and they take them off of an illuminated, the schedule that we have in the Western world with illuminated light. And they find that that people naturally fall into a cycle where they sleep for 4 hours and then wake up and be awake for an hour or two and then go back to sleep for 4 hours. Now, who has time to do that? But so we've got this artificial idea that you have to sleep 8 hours straight through, cram it all together. We do have that fundamental need for sleep. And you really are kidding yourself if you think that, oh, well, but I get by on 5 hours of sleep and it's not a problem. It's kind of an issue. It's an issue. The research tells us. And there are a lot of ways that you can, very basic techniques you can begin to use to change how you're sleeping and to improve your sleep. I testify that I am on a CPAP machine now. I was dragged to it, and it has completely changed my life. And I sleep much longer than I did before, much better. I feel much more rested. Simple things like these devices. Mila was very kind about telling your phone to take a meditation break. Oh my God, you have to give it. It has to be a sleep break too. Please don't take these to bed with you. The research shows us that, it tells us that, if you can have a break of an hour before you go to sleep without screens, you're going to be much better off. There are a lot of other techniques as well. If you wake up in the middle of the night, don't stay in bed, get up. If you're in bed for more than 10 minutes, tossing and turning, get up and go do something else, because the body gets trained that it's okay to lie in bed and roll around. And what you want the body to know is that when you go to bed, it's time to sleep. It's the first dimension. Eating. Get back to this question of how am I varying from normal, and is my normal healthy? I am not about to tell you what healthy is when it comes to food. You can find support in the literature for just about every position you want to take outside of you should eat Krispy Kreme donuts every morning for breakfast. But I think you have a sense that how you're eating matters. What you're eating matters. And if you're noticing changes in how much you're eating and what kinds of foods you're eating, you might start to wonder why that is. What else might be going on for you? How are you using it for comfort? How are you using it maybe as a way to control something where other aspects of your life don't feel like you're in control? The third is exercise. I run every morning. And it's not because I'm vain, a little bit, but it is. But it's because it helps me deal with my anxiety, and it never would have stuck for me as a practice if I hadn't immediately noticed that I felt a lot less anxious. It's the number one intervention for depression and anxiety, by far. Regular exercise is. So. You want to pay attention to the quality of your relationships. Are they changing? Are you allowing yourself enough time to spend with your loved ones? And are you really present for them, right? It's also very helpful, standing in the Jung Center, I should say this, to know the difference between introversion and extraversion. Does that sound familiar? If you're an introvert, you get your energy from being internal, from solitude. That doesn't mean you don't like people. It means that you get your energy, if you recharge when you're alone and when you're doing relatively solitary activities where you're not directly engaging with someone else. Extroverts get energy from being around other people. My wife and my son are extroverts. I'm very happy that they have each other at the end of the night. Because I am done. When I go home, I just want to read or watch MASH or something. The last dimension, but know that about yourself. It is okay. If you're an introverted person, it's okay for you to not want to interact with other people. You just need to make time and space for that to happen in a normal way. The last dimension of self-care has to do with meaning and what we might call spirituality. People have become more comfortable talking about spirituality. I would say it's about having experiences that provide contact with the ground of meaning in your life, and making sure that you have space for them, and that you're noticing when you're losing a sense of meaning, particularly in your professional work. If you don't care anymore, one of the symptoms of burnout is something called depersonalization, and that's where you're not able to see the other human being as a human being, that you start thinking about them as a label. In the psychotherapeutic world, you stop talking about your client and you start talking about your borderline or your bipolar client or whatever. They're not a person anymore. I'm going to I'll tell you, I'm just going to end with a story. This is a story that was very important to C.G. Jung, this Swiss psychiatrist. One of the things that was remarkable about Jung is he was extremely well read in the world's wisdom traditions. And he was particularly fond of Taoism. And he loved the story about I think it was told to him by Richard Wilhelm, who was a translator of Taoist literature, about a rainmaker. So there's a village in China, and they were going through a terrible drought. And the leaders of the village had villagers coming to them all the time saying, you need to call a rainmaker, you need to call a traditional person who will come out and perform the rituals that we need to bring the rain. And they resisted and said that's not rational and that makes no sense. We're not going to give in to superstition. But the drought became so severe and the pressure became so intense that they decided to go ahead and do it. So they bring the rainmaker to town, and he comes to the edge of town, and the village leaders meet him there and describe the situation to him. And he says, okay. And he builds a dwelling. He builds a little sort of lean-to. And he goes into the lean-to for 3 days and 3 nights. On the third morning, it's the fourth morning, the rains begin to fall. And the village leaders go to him and say, we couldn't believe this to be possible. What did you do? And he said, well, I came to a place that was out of order. And I looked in myself and I found that I was out of order. And that I needed to bring myself back into order. And then the community could come back into order. We have to, as professionals, attend to the ways in which we're allowing ourselves to be ordered, prioritizing that work of separating ourselves from the collective, from the work, giving ourselves the space and time to attend to what we need. Thank you all so much. And I'm done with the talky part. And what I want to do is welcome Ale here to share with you his gifts and his perspective on these issues.
Thank you, Sean. And really grateful to be here. Particularly grateful for those who have been in our programs before and have heard some of these meditations and are still coming. So thank you. I'm particularly grateful today to Mila and her incredible work with MasterWord and really her care. The way that she cares for MasterWord, the care that she has for all of you, it's really remarkable. I've known Mila for probably 7-8 years now. And one of our main connectors was when she brought one of her masters. That's MasterWord. And in that, we got to know each other and the importance of one's own meaning in life and the spiritual well-being. Well, Sean and I met in grad school. You heard that he did his master's in religious studies when I was doing my graduate work at Rice as well. And so we met there, and that was many years ago, and the hairs were very different. But since then, we kept in touch. And we kept in touch, and we noticed that we cared for very similar things. One of the things that we shared, actually, from very early on was the Jung Center. Sean, at that time, was not the director. He actually started in the front desk and kind of kept on working up. And one of my teachers, Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche, used to teach here and continues to teach here. And I used to start Actually, at the beginning, I would be the one kind of organizing a little bit of his talks and doing some of the flyers and so forth. And then they asked me to start teaching here as well. One of the things I always loved about the Jung Center is that the importance that they kept on maintaining the human spirit. This is something that is really important and that many times we leave aside. And what I mean by human spirit and what we mean by human spirit, it doesn't have to be with any particular religion. It has to be with what's important for you, what brings meaning to you in this life. I know for those of you who are in different aspects of healthcare professionals, as well as all of you who are translators, whether they are in the healthcare professions or others. When I meet, and I met many of you, when I meet you and I ask you, I see a passion that you're doing this because you really love what you do and that you really care for those that you're translating for. It's not just a job. And this is what I see a lot in healthcare. This is what I see a lot in what we do at the Jung Center. This is what I see and what my colleagues at MD Anderson, at UT Health. And many times I actually meet some of you as translators in some of when I meet a patient that needs a translation and so forth. Now, this care is so important. And what I also noticed is that it wears out sometimes. And it wears out not because we are less caring, but actually is because we care sometimes too much. And we don't have the tools to keep on caring. So one of the things that we noticed, and Sean mentioned about this, is the importance of our intention. And the importance of, as we bring that to our job, how can we keep that intention alive when we have maybe a difficult patient, a difficult situation? And this is really what it's about. So one of the ideas of bringing this Mind, Body, Spirit Institute here at the Jung Center is really to work with those issues. One of our programs, and actually I'll talk more on Wednesday about this program. I have a 3-hour session here. I call it CPR. So you have one idea of CPR, right? So CPR is when something acute is happening, you have cardiopulmonary resuscitation. I have a different kind of CPR that we offer here. And the CPR that we offer here is a compassionate professional renewal. So the idea is that we, as different kinds of professionals, deal with our stress. And that we deal with our stress because we have, many times, we're burned out. And a lot of the times, this burnout comes for over-empathizing. We are so much, as translators, as social workers, as different professionals with healthcare, we're not just in the patient's shoes. We're in the patient's skin. We're in the patient's heart. When we're translating for them, we are them. We translate in the first person. This can have a toll on us, as you already know. So what are ways that we can deal with that besides a Jack and Coke? Right? What are ways that we can work that having a better sense of lifestyle? All the things that Sean spoke are really important, and that's why we decided to have a healthy food for you, right? Mediterranean diet is one of the diets that it's known to be one of the healthiest ones. Of course, if you're like me, sometimes you see this fantastic food, maybe you ate more than what you need to, but at least it was healthy. Then you need to do the other part, right? Which is walking back home. So exercise is also important. And actually, one of the things that we notice is important we see in the literature of exercise is that even if you do like an hour of workout every day, if the rest of the day you're sitting, that's not that good. If you have any of these devices, whatever brand it is, it might tell you that it has some exercise component. What does it tell you? You haven't stood for over an hour. So let me ask you to stand up for a moment. So as you stand up, I also want you to notice your breathing. I know you are breathing, but I want you to pay attention to it. And breathe in a way that really nurtures you. Maybe if you need to, you can stretch a little bit because you've been sitting for a while, and maybe you need to stretch in whichever way is comfortable stretching. I'm not saying any particular shape or form. Just stretch, maybe yawn if you need to, maybe shake your limbs, breathe in and out a little more, shake, and then sit down. So sometimes just a moment of standing, that was less than a minute, and that's all you need. Not only to tell your watch that you stood up every hour, but also actually to tell your body. The body notices it. And if you actually had, electrodes in your body scanning you, it will actually notice that. So I would recommend you to do that every hour. So now what's important too is to bring a mindful intention to that. And that adds to how not only we're doing our standing, but also how we bring that to our work. So one of the things I want to mention is, how do we notice, as Sean was saying, what are the signs that we notice that we're kind of off our normal, off our balance? And how do we find ourselves to recalibrate? Because many times, if we pay attention, we know that each one of us has different signs that we know about when we're out of calibration. Maybe it's a particular pain in a particular part of your body. Maybe it's a particular tension. Maybe it's a particular way of noticing that you're tired. Maybe it's a particular pain in a particular part of the body. And most of the times, we don't pay attention to it. But what happens if we do? If we do, we can do a simple method. And we gave you a little card there that says stop. So stop sounds pretty simple. So stop is an acronym that you can use like this. So you notice one of these signs. And so that sign is asking you to stop for a moment. Of course, if you're in the middle of a translation, you're not going to stop. You finish the translation. But after that, you take a moment to yourself. And as you stop, so the S is for stop, and the T is for take a deep breath. The O is for be open. Observe what's going on. And the P is to proceed, or, you know what, I'm not ready to proceed. I need to still breathe, observe myself, and then I'm ready to proceed. So this is something useful. Actually, I was leading a meditation this morning, as I always do at UT, for the medical schools and staff and faculty, and we were talking about how we can put this stop formula in our badges. It's something, in our badges we have so many other things. So something for our self-care is important. What happens in our systems, in our healthcare systems, is that we don't start paying care enough to ourselves until something happens. And usually we wait until something really bad happens. So, as some of you know, I work at MD Anderson. And our area of faculty health and well-being didn't exist until one of our faculty members committed suicide. We don't need to wait until that, right? I know a lot of patients that, whether it's cancer or other situation, that's the stop sign that they say, I need to change my life. And I think it's an important notice to change your life. But do we have to wait until that? So partly is, there's plenty of literature already knowing that we need to have healthier lifestyles. And that we need to know, as healthcare providers, that we need to be healthy in order to help others. You know, the classic example of the mask at the airplane, right? We all know that example. So we should remember that because it's important. Now, let's talk a little bit about what you can do besides the STOP formula, because what I like to teach you is a little bit of a couple of rituals. Now, rituals, again, not in a religious way, rituals in a way of mind-body connection, where the breath becomes an important aspect of our nurturing. Now, I also want to remind you that when we do this, there's a formal aspect of doing them, meaning I would recommend to take some time during the day to do them. Maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, maybe 20 minutes. Some of you may be really getting into it and do an hour a day. But let me remind you that even if you do, there's still 23 hours left. And that partly is how do we bring this into our everyday life. So let me give you one example of that, and then I'll guide you into a meditation. So, as many of us lived Harvey here, one of our patients, and she let me share this story. One of our patients is from California, and she was here during Harvey, and as she told me, she freaked out. So she was in her hotel, and she found herself with her cup of tea inside a closet. She was so freaked out. And she was there sitting and kind of panicking. And after a while, she realized, I have my cup of tea. And she smelled the cup of tea, and she drank from the cup of tea. And she calmed down, and she remembered, actually one of the classes I teach at MD Anderson is on meditation and tea, meditation and daily life, using things such as tea. And she called us. She said, I'm so happy with the Integrative Medicine Center, the meditation, because it changed my whole experience. So when you learn these kind of practices, you can apply them. And you can apply them not just in kind of sitting in a Zen meditation. You don't have to do that. It's just taking the time to find tools that work for you. So I'm going to lead you in a meditation and then give you a few tools that might be useful for you to apply in your everyday life. So since you're all sitting and you're in a chair, I'm not going to ask you to sit on the floor. But I will ask you maybe to uncross your legs and to feel the ground, right? And that as you feel the ground, you can either close your eyes or not. I will be continually talking, so if you need to see what I say through our translators, you better not close your eyes. So as you feel the ground, just breathe. Preferably through your nose. And as you breathe in and out, feel the breath in your body. And see if you can bring that breath not just into your lungs, but actually lower towards your abdomen. Sometimes I find it useful to bring a hand or both hands right in front of my belly button, because as I breathe in, I can allow that breath to fill my belly like a balloon and notice that breath there. And as I breathe out, exhale it back through the nose. So see if that is helpful for you. Breathe in, breathe out. And as you keep on breathing in and out in this way, keep your mind's attention on your breath. Notice your breath coming in and out through your nose. So that if you get distracted, you bring it back through your nose. Notice the rising and contracting of your belly. So that if you get distracted, that might be another place of focus. Notice the flow of your breath from your nose into your abdomen and back through your nose. And notice that if you get distracted, you can maintain that flow as you come back to your nose or to your belly and to the flow of your breath. And if you're visual, you can bring a simple visualization of visualizing your breath as green light. As many times, green is the color related to the air element, and light is its most subtle form. So it's like connecting to that breath. You might even feel that light and the sense of breathing nurturing every cell of your body, nurturing you emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. And that as you breathe out, you can let go stuff. Whatever thought, whatever emotion, whatever is there, let go. So then in the next inhalation, you breathe in freshness of that breath and that nurturing and that green light. So you do that at your own rhythm, trying to maintain that breath all the way into your abdomen and back through your nose. Now, as you keep on focusing on your breath, even the chattering of your mind can quiet down. See if you can pay attention to that quietness, to that silence, so that instead of letting your mind follow thoughts or sounds, shift and pay attention to the silence, which might be a doorway to your inner peace. Breathing back into your abdomen and back through your nose. Feeling your chair and the ground as support. Feeling your back straight and lengthen and chest open and heart open as you breathe and nurture yourself. Just a few more times. Notice if you have any tensions in your shoulders and neck, and relax that area. Notice if you have any tensions in your mouth or jaw, and relax that area. You may even want to relax your tongue as you place it in your upper palate or behind your teeth. And let your eyes be completely relaxed, whether they're closed but not too tight or open. And when you're open, sometimes you can look down as a peaceful gaze. Every breath helps you reconnect, letting tensions dissolve like ice melts in water. And if your mind gets distracted, just bring it back to your breath without judgment or criticism. A few more times. And slowly you might feel that you're more connected to your body, that your mind is not racing so much, and that maybe you're also connected to the area of your heart. And as you connect to your heart, there's a possibility of connecting deeper to yourself and reconnecting to your intention, to your meaning. Just take a moment to breathe into that. You might find yourself that there's a different kind of awareness arising, like dawning, like the sun in the morning shining, and you are that sun, shining without bias, without judgment or criticism, without grasping or rejecting. And in that shining of the sun, you feel the warmth, which might be your loving kindness, your compassion, your joy. That as you extend that to the people you serve, your heart is not just open to them, but also open to yourself. So you're giving and receiving, caring and self-caring. With every breath. And maintaining that sense of connectedness without needing to open your eyes yet. Slowly allow your body to relax. Maybe your legs, maybe your hips, your shoulders. Keep on breathing. As you maybe want to massage a part of the body that needs it. And maybe get your hands, maybe massaging your face and rubbing your eyes and slowly letting your eyes open and close a few times as you integrate with the external world without losing touch of your inner home. So this is a practice that not only I do every day, I call it connecting with your heart. How was it? Was it relaxing? Sometimes too relaxing? I didn't hear snoring, which is good. However, Sean mentioned the importance of sleep. And sometimes, most of us maybe do not sleep 7 to 10 hours a day. And so actually sometimes meditation, what we found in our studies is that when we do these practices, we are calmer, and if we have the time, we will be sleeping better and even having a shorter time of latency, which means the moment we want to go to sleep until we fall asleep, and with less medicine. So you can use that, and actually Mila mentioned my book. I have this in my book. And also what you can do is, how do we bring this into our daily practice? So one of the ways is, of course, taking a little time. And it could be, what we did was probably around 10 minutes. So for those who want, for example, in the website at MD Anderson, mdanderson.org/integrative med center, we have these practices there for free in English and Spanish. Hopefully we'll get them into other languages as well. But they're there. mdanderson.org/integrative med center, or if you just look for Integrative Medical Center at MD Anderson, you'll find it. Or if not, email me and we'll give it to you. So these are free and available for you and for the people that you work with. Now, as I mentioned, the STOP formula is important as well. But what I want you to get into your life is that you can do things in more moments that you can think of. So one typical thing is, how often do you wash your hands, right? So when you wash your hands, it's a great opportunity of not just washing your hands, but washing your mind. A good colleague of mine, Jim Duffy, who's now in California, as we were talking about these practices, he said, Ale, did you realize that in every patient's room, we now have a meditation device? I said, really? And he said, yeah, that gel. You know, when I go, right before I see a patient, I get that gel, and for a moment, I'm clearing my head of all the things, whether it's my fight with my wife, whether it's my last patient, and then I'm here 100%. That's very useful. Be very useful for you as well, right? Because you're carrying things. This is what vicarious trauma is about. And so, as we clear, we are 100% in the next situation. And so, yes, for your work is important, but I would say that for your everyday life is important. So when you go back home, when you meet a good friend, and you're there just for coffee, what happens if you're 100% there? Research shows that we're only 50% there in all our activities. Actually, 52%. So 48% of the time, our mind is somewhere else. So what if we move the needle a little more? These practices can help you do that. So washing your hands, using the gel in an intentional way. Now, the other one is what we call a meditation pill. So meditation pills, there's no pills involved. So meditation pills is like the stop formula, right? You stop, take a deep breath. So what's your pill? Your pill could be the breath. Your pill could be the green light. And just notice. Just notice how you feel. And every step is important. To stop, to take a deep breath, to be open, to observe, and to notice the P, to proceed or not ready to proceed. Finally, another one that comes from a great teacher called Thich Nhat Hanh. And he talks about the meditation of the red traffic light. Who would think that, right? So you're in your car, driving, and you get to that red light. The first thing you think is meditation? No, right? The first thing that comes to mind is, I'm late, blah, 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 you know, or in these days, maybe you take your phone and try to do a last text. So what he says is, leave all that aside and thank the red light. Thank you, red light. What a great opportunity to breathe in peace, breathe out all the stuff that I have in my mind. So that even if I'm late to my appointment, at least I'll be calm. Now, this one I would suggest to do with your eyes open. And that when the green light comes, proceed. Otherwise, you'll hear other people saying other kinds of meditation words and things to you. So, in a nutshell, what we would like to offer you is that through Mila and through MasterWord and her website, through the work that we do here at the Jung Center and the Mind, Body, Spirit Institute, we want to offer you possibilities of tools for you. So these are some of the tools, and as I said, you can look in the website, there's free tools, use them. And if you need more, come back. We're here for you. We really want to help, and there's a lot of possibilities, because for some of you, this can be a tool that is just what you got, that's just what you needed, and you can use it. For some of you, this is not even what I need, so press the delete button, don't worry about it. Now, for some of you, this is something that it's more than just CPR. It's more than just dealing with the acute thing, but you want to flourish more in this. So we invite you to come and do more. There's plenty more, and we love to continue working with you. And again, I want to thank Mila for this opportunity, and we have around 15 minutes for questions. So thank you very much.
Check to make sure that that is actually the case. Are we go to 8:30 or are we going to go to 8:15? Okay, good. Okay. So yeah, questions. I'm going to run around. Believe it or not, I'm wearing 3 microphones right now. Okay.
And then where did you fall? Right in the middle, where you're half introvert, half extrovert, like an ambivert? Is that
So, okay, I can, unfortunately, because of the logistics of the microphone tonight, I actually have to use this one, so I can run around. Don't worry about it. I'll run back and forth with the microphone, Mila. Okay, so hold those ideas lightly, but what I would say is that, Jung understood introvert and extrovert to be, introversion and extroversion to be on a continuum. And that, I'm pretty introverted, and also I've learned to function well in big group situations like this, for instance, or on a day-to-day basis working with people. So in a Jungian typological sense, it's introversion, extroversion, but it's really about kind of where you fall on a continuum. You can kind of fall in the middle, where you get energy from being around people. You also get energy. You're content to be on your own and independent. And, yeah. Does that work? Okay. Other questions?
Hello there, Carlos. My question is, can a pill be a memory? A positive memory, a blissful memory. That's very ingrained in my mind.
You got it. You can talk with your mic. I just can't talk with mine.
So, so sometimes that works. So, for example, that works for certain things. So let's say your memory, and let me just make up something. So let's say your memory is a great place, right? Maybe it's a place at the beach, maybe it's a sacred place, or maybe it's a situation with someone, right? Because these are things that kind of are healing for us. So if in that moment that you need to stop and then you bring that could be a great thing. That's maybe what you need. Maybe what you need is almost like an inner hug, and that's important. So if that's what you need, that's great. Other times, what we need is a little more kind of a spaciousness, a sense of really allowing ourselves to be more open and just connect to a deeper part of ourselves, and maybe we do that. So in a way, these are all part of your toolbox. So kind of what you do is, in that moment when I said in the O, be open and observe, notice what you need. What tool do I need from my toolbox? Do I need a memory? Do I need a meditation? Do I need to just stand up and move? Any of these are fine, and you use them in that way. Yeah. Yeah?
Other comments or questions? Hang on a second. There you go.
You mentioned part of self-care is that you exercise regularly.
Yeah.
How much of that is part of the release of endorphins? How much of that is being solitary and meditative while you're exercising? What are the factors that go into the importance of exercise?
So this is a really good question, and I feel somewhat out of my depth talking about the medical. Are you got me on camera there, or do you want me back up front? Am I good? Okay, good. The research is very clear that it changes neural chemistry. I can't speak to the specific neurotransmitters that are being released, but if you talk to neuroscientists, they're going to say exercise is releasing neurotransmitters. It changes your mood and also changes your reactivity to different situations. I can't speak to. Obviously, meditation can do very similar things, and I've seen very recently research on meditative exercise, which I'll let Alejandro talk about if he knows anything about it, which I find fascinating, that you practicing a kind of presence while you're exercising. I can just say informally that it works well for me, and it has worked for others who are dealing with depression and anxiety. The studies are very clear about that. When people are exercising regularly, that their symptoms lift or are just less severe. So. Okay.
Yeah, so I think that it's both, as you were saying, Sean, and in terms of the meditative component, there has been studies of people doing exercise kind of in a more meditative way and in a distractive way. A lot of times we go to the gyms and we get TVs, right? And I don't know if they actually shown if what you see in the TV has also an effect, which I'm sure we do, especially today with news. But in any case, I think when I saw this study that showed that by actually being more meditative, it's actually better for you as well. In a way, you're doing more than one thing at a time, even though in general, I would say multitasking is not a good idea. In this case, you're kind of integrating.
I play Pokemon Go while I'm running. I have to confess, I could do a lot better about being present. I don't know that we've come close to answering your question, but
there's another way to induce the release of endorphins, which is eating spicy food. So if you get any sort of meditative effect.
From eating spicy food, you're releasing endorphins. That's wonderful. Yeah. I can imagine that will help. Yeah. So did you have a question? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Nadine, one of the most stressful situations I encounter through interpreting is during asylum interviews.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering whether you would have any tips as to what to do afterwards, after 3, 4, 5 hours of intense questioning and responses where we go in details into the traumas and like the people that the assemblies have encountered, and I've noticed that the calmer I am during the interviews, that the calmer the assigning will be, and will be able to respond calmly, but afterwards is when it's really hard to deal with.
Yes.
And I find that I bring all this home with me. These images.
Yes.
What kind of interviews did you
Asylum interviews. She does. Because of the multiple microphones, I want to make sure that we repeat the questions because they may not be coming through on the microphone that's live streaming. So the question was about asylum interviews and the 3 or 4 or 5 hour asylum interviews that you notice a difference if you're calm and you're able to be present with the people, that the interviews go better for them, but then you're taking it all in and you're taking it home with you. I want to turn it over to you in a second. Let me just make a quick comment, which is that one of the critiques that I have for myself about giving presentations about self-care is that it doesn't take into account the dimension of responsibility that the organizations and the structures that put us in these situations have to attend to our psychological well-being. So from that, I want to say that it is really important to have someone to whom you can talk about the experience. In debriefing, most of the literature encourages that. It isn't necessarily always necessary, but I will say in other versions of this presentation, I've also talked about the ethics of sharing your experience with people who are maybe going to be traumatized by the experience too. Like this can have a ripple effect, but within structures of support within organizations, you want to have a supervisor or someone who's designated who can help you process the experience. And if you don't have that, then that's something that's useful that I think I would push to set up. Nothing else to find it for yourself. Obviously, I'm a psychotherapist, and I can say, psychotherapists are there and are trained to handle that material, but we're not always able to afford that. Who can, to afford having a psychotherapist on a regular basis? So, first, having someone to talk with about it. Secondly, I've talked about self-care and the sort of the dimensions of this. I think what you want to do is immediately, as soon as you can, access ways of caring for yourself that you know are reliable. If it's getting a massage, if it's taking a bath, if it's, spending time with friends, or things that are immediately helpful to you. I would schedule that into the day. Ale, do you want to?
Yeah. Well, first of all, as you know from the card that we get from MasterWord, there is things after the encounter, exactly as you're saying, the brief, and actually how having someone to talk to is important, both in the professional side as well as kind of as a friend. Of course, you have to, particularly because many of the things that you talk about are confidential, that's also an important component. as you have it, as you said, within the system to have a supervisor, someone that you can talk to and you can actually talk those details because maintaining the confidentiality. The other thing is also has to do with the system that sometimes they put us in situations that are unhealthy. I think for our interview, it's probably not going to be healthy, and at the end of that, you might not be as bright as you were at the beginning. And so how much of that you can actually absorb is important, and so taking breaks for that as well. And all the other things that we mentioned, and that just Sean mentioned as well. So besides the eating and the exercising and sleeping and so forth, and using these tools, massage and other ways as well. But I can't emphasize enough the sense of others supporting you in that, both in the professional side as well as a friendship to share things in terms of how you feel. Because sometimes, so in the professional side, what you share is maybe you can share the whole situation because there is a confidentiality. In the friend side, you don't need to share the situation. What you need to share is how you feel. Yeah. And so that part is also important. It's not like, it doesn't matter so much in that case, well, this is what happened to this person. It's like, after that encounter, this is how I feel. I feel depleted, and I just need a hug. I just need to go and have a cup of tea together. Would you, spend some time together? So those parts are also important. And I think it's important to give each other that as colleagues and friends because I think there's also an issue of knowing how to receive. In healthcare, we know how to give. We're not that good as receiving. And so I think opening up and allowing to receive, that is part of self-caring, that's important too.
Let's say just very briefly too on that, and I'll run back. I've been in trainings with the Israeli Trauma Coalition on some of these very topics, and one of the things that they say is very important for professionals is to have little rituals. To have a ritual of beginning the work and a ritual that is associated with ending the work. Be something very small. It can be opening your book, closing your book. It can be a little prayer or something that you say to yourself. But that sets you up psychologically to understand that your time working is done and you can walk away from it's not going to be as easy as flipping the switch on and off, though, certainly. There you go. No.
America.
Hi.
I have a question. You said something earlier about between being
introverted and extroverted.
You said either or, it's fine. You can cope with your feelings differently.
Yes.
Now my question is this. I'm an extrovert. I've always been.
Yeah.
But lately, since I started working in the ICU, I don't feel like being an extrovert. Actually, it drains me. It actually, I don't want to. I get anxiety being around people like on the weekends. And I'm really happy just being at home, drawing. Yeah. And that is actually recharging me. Yeah. Is that bad? Is it? Or is it okay to change?
No. Yeah, so that's a great question. That's a very good question. So the question is it okay to change? If you've found yourself being extroverted in the past and you're becoming more introverted, there are a couple of answers to that question. One is, again, using this model, one of the things Jung said is, over the course of your life, your sort of developmental task is to come toward the middle. It's to not be out on the far end, but to become, so introverts become more extroverted over time and extroverts become more introverted. I would say that if you notice a sudden shift, we would start to be concerned about social isolation and avoidance behavior. And so that's where in this language of vicarious trauma, you just want to notice for yourself, okay, am I having real anxiety spikes around being around other people? Am I avoiding them intentionally? Am I... what you're doing in terms of your interior work and being creative and so on, that's very hopeful sounding. It sounds like you really are finding a way to work through what you're dealing with. But I would pay attention to the changes and see if it continues if it gets to a place where it's impairing your life or impairing your work, then that's where then I would start to think about other kinds of interventions, right?
And I think we're about to
About out of time.
close. Do we have any last question?
I'll hand this over to you.
Wow.
I want to ask you guys, who learned one new thing today that is helpful?
It's
All right, that's great. And who had one big self-realization? No, I didn't.
Yeah.
Who is interested in having more of these type of workshops?
Yeah.
I want to tell you that the Jung Center has these workshops on a regular basis. There is one coming up August 1st. Dr. Chow.
2 days.
In 2 days. They also have them on the website, so please make sure to stay connected. Check out their programming. They're very closely located to the medical center. And please feel free to ask questions, because I know both of these wonderful gentlemen, Sean and Alejandro, can be found in this center. Also, in your bag, you have the STOP formula for you to remember. You have the meditation pills. And you have some tips for things to do before, during, and after the encounter. So, thank you so much.
Thank you.